let's talk about early vote. I've seen so many claims out there about what the early vote has meant so far in this election. And I think, honestly, there's just a lot of uh, exaggerations, inappropriate use of data. But in some cases, people are nailing the trend right. And let me give a couple of caveats as we start. Number one, as Harry Anton said, there's a graveyard of people out there trying to predict the eventual result in an election based on early vote. But the early vote can tell us something about what's going on here. And I mentioned this, I think, a week or two ago, but the early vote should be different this time in 2024 than it was in 2020. We were in the middle of a pandemic last time. Trump was telling his people not to turn out. So the combination of those two things, meaning the differences between how Democrats and Republicans treated the pandemic, combined with what Trump was saying, depressed early vote and absentee balloting, which we kind of roll in together with early vote, mail-in balloting, et cetera. It depressed GOP use of those tools. Some people think that might have contributed to Trump's loss. So we'll keep that in mind as we analyze trends. You should not expect the trends to be the exact same this time around as last time. You would hopefully expect the Republicans to do better no matter what this time around. Now, how much better you would expect them to do, depends on which analyst you're talking to. And a point about language, there's this term out there that you may be hearing called cannibalizing the vote, meaning cannibalizing the November 5th vote. So what people mean by this is if you turn out to early vote now, that means that that's one fewer vote for you, Republicans or Democrats, Harris or Trump, than you would have on November 5th. And it cuts both ways, right? So for every early vote, that's just one fewer person. But at the same time, for every, let's use Harris as an example. For every Harris voter that turns out now, that's one fewer persons or people that Harris and her team have to turn out on election day, which means that they can be more efficient with their resources on election day. Fewer doors to knock, fewer phone calls to make. It also de-risks election day. The more people that turn out to vote, the less that weather will play a role. A lot of people are getting sick. I've been battling a cold for a week. Some people, especially low propensity voters, might just be like, forget it. There could be a tough Eagles loss on Monday Night Football or whatever. I actually don't know if the Eagles are playing Monday Night Football, but you get the picture. A lot of things can happen on election day. You get people to vote early. It helps. So with that said, what are some of the big trends before we get into the states? Number one, both parties have high propensity voters leaning heavily into early vote, mail-in vote, absentee voting. But the way that it's kind of dividing between the two parties is quite different. The GOP is embracing early vote in person like they have never done before, right? And the magnitude of this is what we're going to keep an eye on, because you would expect that they would embrace early and or absentee or mail-in voting more, given that Trump has been more positive about it. And maybe perhaps that the party learned their lesson from last time. The magnitude is something we need to keep an eye on. Whereas Dems are, for one reason or another, embracing mail-in and absentee balloting more. And of all the trends that we're seeing here, so trend number one, which cuts in favor of Trump, is that you have more of his people embracing these early voting tools. A trend that's working opposite him is that the gender gap in favor of women is very much real, which obviously could present some challenges for Trump. But it's all in what data you're comparing it to. So let's go state by state. Let's start with North Carolina. Over 1 million votes have been cast in North Carolina already. We are 4 days into a 17-day early voting period in North Carolina. Right now, the total early in-person vote is as follows: 330,777 for Democrats, GOP 317,068, unaffiliated voters 291,279. So Democrats have a modest advantage there. But the second week of North Carolina early vote tends to be more favorable to Republicans. So you could expect that to shift a bit. Michael McDonald, who I will quote from extensively here, has the following things to say. He said registered Democrats are 36.6% of returned mail ballots, while Republicans are 27.1%. But registered Democrats have a narrower lead in in-person early vote, 34.8% to 34.4%. You put it all together, Democrats lead the current vote 35% to 33.7%. That margin in 2020, so we're comparing it to 2020. So keep in mind, Democrats 35 to 33.7 in 2024. That number was 37.3 Democrat, 31.7 in 2020. So Democrats are trending behind their 2020 numbers, which again is what you would expect here. A couple other numbers here. There are the new voters, so the lower propensity voters, new voters, are roughly even amongst parties. So 14% of registered Democrats have no 2020 voting history compared to 14.6% of Republicans. So marginal difference there. Second is the gender statistics in North Carolina are exactly the same as 2020. So 51.5% of early voters, women. And in that was 51.5% in 2020 of early voters were women. In 2024, it's also 51.5%. So same exact numbers there. So that's what we're seeing so far in North Carolina. Let's go to Georgia. The state does not release party registration, so you have to kind of glean numbers from demographics. Georgia has almost 1.4 million votes cast, which represent 27.4% of the roughly 5 million votes that we saw in 2020. Again, what you're seeing is a gender trend here. So right now they're matching the turnout for women, which was 55% of the total, which is good news for Harris. But non-Hispanic white turnout is up from 2020. Right now it's 59.2% of the electorate is non-Hispanic white compared to 56.5% in 2020. That is good news for Trump. Some people who are trying to see positive news for Democrats are saying that like the so-called souls to the polls initiatives, which is when black churches turn people out, tends to happen on the last day of early vote, the last Sunday of early vote. So they say that that number could change. I have not seen any convincing analysis to say that that will be enough to change that overall number in favor of the non-Hispanic white, given how high the denominator here is. Young vote is also down, probably bad news for Harris. So far, people 18 to 25 make up only 5.8% of early voters, while in 2020 they were 8%. Michael McDonald does, over at the University of Florida, does say that these younger voters tend to turn out more towards the end of the early vote period. Again, we'll see. Michigan. Michigan has reported just over 1 million votes cast, which constitutes 18% of the 5.6 million votes cast in 2020. The early vote has already surpassed 2020, and this is in large part due to changes in the state law and some changes that the Secretary of State made, which make it easier to early vote in the state. The data is really messy and incomplete, so a lot of the data gurus out there are not drawing too many conclusions out there, but one thing you could say for sure is women are constituting a significant advantage over men. I think it's the highest I've seen in any state. It's 56.2% of the Michigan early voters are women, a 12.6 advantage over men. Let's go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has no in-person early voting, but it's generous with the mail ballot requests in return. As of Friday, nearly 800,000 people had returned mail ballots, which is 11.3% of the 2020 total turnout and 30% of the 2020 early vote of 2.6 million. And there were 1.7 million mail ballot requests. The basic consensus among a lot of experts out there is that 2024 will have a lower number of mail ballots returned in 2020, which again, you'd expect no COVID and no major changes to the law that will make it easier. There is evidence of greater Democratic engagement, though. 48.5% of registered Democrats have returned the requested mail ballot compared to 40.4% of Republicans. But keep in mind, this is people who requested mail ballots. So, one thing we know for sure is more Republicans have requested mail ballots than ever before. So this data can cut both ways. And some experts are saying, based on a number of different data points, that there could be a much redder election day in Pennsylvania because of some of the structures of the law there, due to the fact that it's not like a traditional in-person early vote, which Republicans have been embracing in other states, like the one I'm about to talk about in Nevada. So given the fact that the tools here, mail-in, absentee, et cetera, are things that Democrats, for one reason or another, are more comfortable with, and that they don't have the in-person early vote, that this is going to be a particularly red election day So keep that in mind. Nevada, this is where we've had some of the more interesting commentary out there. Republicans are dominating the in-person early vote in Nevada. They also have mail-in ballots, which are cutting towards Democrats. So the in-person early votes, Republicans are 53.3% so far of the early votes cast. These are not big numbers, but that's compared to 28.4% of Democrats. Democrats have a slight edge in total votes when you account for the mail-in and absentee, but certain state level experts are sounding modest alarms. I don't want to overstate it. John Ralston is the most respected Nevada insider on early voting generally, voting patterns, polling in Nevada. He's been on this podcast before. He came out in 2022. We'll link to his blog and to his X feed. But this is what he said recently. He said Republicans will continue to win in-person early vote everywhere. The question is whether Democratic mail advantage will offset it. Michael McDonald somewhat disagrees with Ralston, who has been a little bit more pessimistic about what he's seeing from Democrats so far. Michael McDonald wrote the following in his newsletter. He says, but I think Ralston is missing the important point that Clark County, where Las Vegas is located in the largest county by far in the state, sent out mail ballots much later than rural counties. Clark is lagging rural counties in mail ballot return rates with only 6.6% returned. 13th out of the 17 counties. Among these rural counties, Democrats are outpacing Republicans in return mail ballot rates. So that is Michael McDonald's take on Nevada. So those are the states. What do we know so far about early vote? I don't think there's anything conclusive so far, other than to say what I have been reading seems to be in line with what the polls have been telling us, which is this is a close race. There is nothing determinative here to tell us one way or the other that there is a sizable advantage for one camp over the other. There is nothing dispositive. The polls are saying this is a neck and neck race. The early vote is telling us this is a neck and neck race, but I'll keep updating you on these trends.